The Witch's Heart. Long ago, when the gods were young and Asgard was new, there came a witch from the edge of the worlds. She knew many ancient spells, but she was especially skilled as a seid, a magic that allowed one to travel out of body and divine the future. This greatly appealed to Odin, the highest of the Aesir. When he learned of her abilities, he offered to impart upon the witch his knowledge of the runes in exchange for teaching him seed. She was uncertain at first. She'd heard enough about Odin to make her hesitate, but she knew he did not share his secrets lightly, which meant her knowledge of Seid must be of great value to him indeed. So she swallowed her suspicions about the grim, one-eyed god and accepted his offer. As they practiced Seid together, the witch found herself drawn farther down than she'd ever travelled before, where she brushed against a place darker than the beginning of time itself. This place frightened her, and the secrets contained there were great and terrible. So she did not dare to go deeper, much to Odin's displeasure, for the knowledge he sought above all else was hidden there, and it seemed to him that only she could reach it. The witch was also teaching her magic to the Aesir rivals, the Vanir, a sister race of gods, whose home she'd passed through on her way to Asgard. The Vanir could think of naught but gold with which to reward the witch for her services, though she cared little enough for it. But when Odin realized she was traveling between Asgard and Vanaheim, he saw an opportunity. He turned the Aesir against the witch and called her Gullavig, gold lust. They drove spears through her and burned her 3 times, and 3 times she was reborn, for she was very old and very hard to kill, and far more than she appeared. Each time she burned, Odin tried to force her down to the dark place to learn what he wanted to know, and each time she resisted. And when the Vanir heard of the Aesir's treatment of her, they became furious, and thus the first war in the cosmos was declared. The 3rd time she was reborn, Gullavig fled, though she left something behind, her speared heart still smoking on the pyre. That was where he found it. Sometime later, he tracked her to the deepest, darkest forest at the farthest edge of Jotunheim, the land of the giants, the Aesir's bitter enemies. This forest was called Ironwood, where the gnarled grey trees were so thick and there was no real path through them, and so tall that they blocked out the sun. He did not have to venture into these woods, though, for by the bank of the river that divided Ironwood from the rest of Jotunheim, he found the witch, staring across the water at the dense forest and the mountains beyond. She sat up upon a rough woolen blanket with a thick cloak about her shoulders and a hood pulled over her head. The sun was shining, but she sat in the shade, hands folded in her lap, leaning against a tree trunk. He watched her for a time, shifting from foot to foot, scratching his nose, listening to the quaint gurgling of the river and the whistling of the songbirds. And then he sauntered up to her, his hands clasped behind his back. He could only see the bottom half of her face, but her skin looked pink, tender, healing, new. When he got closer, he noticed the skin on her hands was the same. She seemed to be resting peacefully. Part of him didn't want to disturb her. Then again, he'd always found the idea of peace to be quite boring. "How long are you going to stand there?" she rasped. She sounded like she hadn't had anything to drink in an age and a half. He figured that breathing in the smoke from one's own pyre 3 times would have that effect on someone. "You're a difficult woman to find," he replied. Truth be told, he wasn't sure how to proceed. He'd come to return what she'd left in Odin's hall, and for something more, though he didn't know exactly what. Something had drawn him to Ironwood that day with her heart tucked into his haversack. And he had a feeling that whatever was pulling him down the path was important, was special, was interesting, for he was so very easily bored. And now, here he was, enticed by the possibility of some excitement and hoping the witch would not disappoint. She didn't reply at first, opting instead to study the strange man who'd approached her. The sun was shining behind him, so she couldn't quite make out his features. Just a deep green travelling cloak and hood, brown pants, brown leather shoes, and the silhouette of wild hair. "I really admire your work," he said conversationally. "You know, sowing chaos wherever you go, making mighty beings fight over your talents. It's impressive, really." A moment passed before she said, "That's not my intention." "What was it then?" She did not reply. "Well, if you're planning on doing it again," he said, "I would love to watch and possibly participate, so long as I don't get caught. But I'll let you know up front, I shall not, under any circumstance, make you a promise I can't talk my way out of. I'm not usually this straightforward about it, so consider yourself lucky. I'm letting you know as a friend." A friend? The word was foreign to her. "Yes, I've decided it just now." He cocked his head. "I'm your first friend. Achievement for you." She ignored the question. "Seems a rather one-sided decision on your part." "Well, I see you're not exactly surrounded by admirers," he studied her. "You seem to be nothing more than a harmless witch from the backwoods. I haven't heard anyone talk like you in a very long time. I'm surprised the Asir would even understand your accent. Who are you? Where do you come from?" "I don't know," she said after a moment. She inclined her head so much so that she could see him, but he couldn't quite see her. "I could ask you the same question about yourself, and you probably wouldn't know the answer either." "Oh, yes." He settled down on his haunches and peered at her. She could see now that he had a pale, angular face, a sharp, slightly upturned nose that gave him an impish look, and shoulder-length dark blonde hair that fell somewhere between wavy and curly. His eyes were grass green, his smile mischievous. The witch nodded once in reply. His smile faltered a bit. "And how could you possibly know that?" "I know things," she said. "You may have heard." "I may have heard that your knowing of things was what got you stabbed and lit on a fire multiple times. Perhaps from now on you should just play dumb." "Well, that's no fun," she said, only half joking, her hand moving instinctively to the vertical slash between her breasts, the place where they'd stabbed out her heart. "That's the spirit," he laughed as he rummaged around in his bag. After a moment, he pulled out a wad of cloth and held it out to her. She took it and started when she felt a bundle pulsing rhythmically in her hands. "Your heart," he explained. "I was going to eat it, but for some reason, but I decided that maybe you should have it back." "Eat it? Oh, why?" "You wouldn't have eaten the heart of a witch, and that cannot be good for your well-being," she said dryly. "I don't know. I wanted to see what happened." She frowned as she unwrapped it. "It seems to have healed quite a bit from the fire, but yes, there's still a hole in it," he finished for her. "You got stabbed. Perhaps it'll heal completely if you put it back where it belongs. Do it now. I won't look." "I can't. It can wait." She replaced the cloth and looked at him. "Thank you." "You're welcome," he said, as he sat down, stretched one leg out, and propped his elbow up on the other knee. "So, I take it you're not going by Gullavig anymore. What do they call you now?" "I'm not sure." She looked at him sideways as he plucked a long piece of grass out of the ground, put it in his mouth, and let it dangle lazily there. She noticed the splash of freckles across his nose and cheeks, and how the sun behind him turned out his outline of curls a violent orange. She was still not sure what to make of this man. It was difficult to decide how much she should tell him. You don't know your own name, he asked, raising his eyebrows. She shrugged. I thought I'd like to travel, in which case they would call me something depending on the nature of my wanderings. She cast a glance across the river at the grey thickets of ironwood, though I may yet decide to rest here for a time. And what will you call yourself then, if you stay? She considered this for a moment or two, and then she said, Angrboda. He wrinkled his nose, and the blade of grass dropped. What? Proclaimer of sorrows? That's an odd name. Why would you want, why would I want to be your friend if that's all you're going to do? You're the one who decided we were friends, she said. And beside, it's not you to whom I'll bring sorrow. Are all witches as cryptic as you? I don't know if I've ever met any other witches, though I think some used to live in the woods too long ago. She looked to the other side of the river again and lowered her voice almost reverently. They say there was one witch here who bore the wolves that chased the sun and the moon, and raised many others still. Right, I heard stories about them growing up, the old one and her wolf children. You heard those stories in Asgard? Well, I'm not from Asgard. Anyway, everyone knows the stories are out there. You're a giant, she said. It was a guess on her part. She did not make it sound like a question. Giant was a misnomer, a name, not a descriptor, for giants were often no larger than the average person. And while her visitor was certainly dressed like one of the Aesir, sometimes there was no physical way to tell a god from a giant. But this man, travelling alone and undisguised, there was something wild about him, something about his eyes that spoke of deep forests and midsummer nights, something untamed, unharnessed. He cannot be a god, can he? He shrugged a shoulder at her deduction. Sort of. Anyway, it seems rather empty around here now. No wolves, no witch mother. Indeed, she said, looked across the river again, feeling a pang in her empty chest. But maybe it was me. Maybe I was their mother. You don't remember, though? No, I don't. Silence fell between them, and he shifted. She got the feeling that he hated when conversations lulled. He had the air of one who enjoyed hearing his own voice. Well, he said at last, I'll have you know that I'm going to make it my personal mission to ignore all your depressing prophecies and do whatever I feel like doing. You can't just ignore prophecies. You can if you try hard enough. Well, I'm not quite sure how that works. He put his arms behind his head, leaned against a tree, and she said haughtily, well, maybe you're just not as clever as I am. So there we go. There is a little bit of the first chapter of The Witch's Heart. Let me know what you think. Do you think are you intrigued enough that you might want to visit that? Let me know.